Everyone's talking about analog bag this, analog hobby crate that. Real craftsy girlies know where it's at. A random pile of stuff in the corner of your room. Mine's actually behind this couch. I'm sitting in front of the couch, and there I can show you, random headphones, yarn, a shawl that I'm working on. Oh, I see a book here that I was reading, a bunch of knitting needles, and the dust jacket of the book I'm currently reading, The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien. Hello, everyone. My name is Leonie, and welcome back to Curiouser and Curiouser, the podcast where we try to find comfort and meaning in a world that is getting increasingly strange. Today, we are discussing a highly requested topic, and that is the trend of going analog media. Everyone wants to go analog this year. Write in journals, watch DVDs, put all your craftsy hobbies in a cute analog bag, and boom, your doom scrolling habit is gone. On the one hand, the trend can be seen as our long-awaited revolt against the shackles of our phones. On the other hand, it has been rightfully criticized for feeding into consumerism and shallowly commodifying the feeling of being off your phone. Today, I want to explore what the analog trend is trying to achieve and whether it succeeds at that. We'll go a little bit into the neuroscience of analog versus digital media, and at the end, I also just want to yap about my own favorite analog hobbies. I'm really excited about this week's topic because I have a lot of craftsy hobbies that I never really share on the internet, like maybe in my stories if you follow me on my Instagram at thebookleo. But my main channel is mostly about my one hobby, and that is books, but I have many other hobbies, so I'm definitely taking this opportunity to talk about them. But first, before we get into that, I wanted to introduce a fun little segment. Hell yeah. Podcast segment. I wanted to share every week a little whimsy moment of the week, something that I do to make my life a little bit more whimsical. And this week, I have been really looking forward to spring. It is midway into February as I'm filming this, and I'm noticing that I'm clutching on to the hope that spring is coming around soon. But also, I know that it always takes so much longer than I think, and every time there's a little bit of sunlight, I'm like, oh, please. I just want spring, and I'm trying not to live too much in this state of looking forward towards something else, and I'm trying to be in the moment a little bit more. So, as someone who absolutely hates winter, I always get a huge dip in my mental health during winter. I feel tired all the time. I'm not happy. I've been trying to savor the moments of lighting a candle because I know that soon the weather is going to be too warm and it's going to be too light outside for too long to be able to light candles in the evening, or at least in a cozy way. So I'm really trying to savor those moments of lighting a nice candle or lighting a nice scented candle, because that's always what I look forward to when autumn comes around, is that it's finally candle lighting season again. So now I'm trying to love the final moments of winter where I can sit inside while it's dark outside or it's raining and it's dreary and I can light a little candle. I'm hoping it'll help me fight my winter dip. And then 2 weeks ago, in the episode about finding beauty in things that are not usually seen as beautiful, I asked you guys to share with me what are some things that you find beauty in that are maybe a little unconventional. And I wanted to share my favorite responses, my favorite little wonderful stories from you guys, because I got so many wonderful comments. I wish I could share them all. This one is from Leah Lou, and she says, "Last week there was a pocket of sunshine here in France. So my husband and I went for a long walk by the canal in our town. We walk this specific route quite often, and so I've had the opportunity to watch how it has changed through the seasons. There was a man who was playing a saxophone by the water. Everyone on the path stopped for at least a moment to listen. Further on the path, we decided to stop for a coffee as it was about that time of day. we didn't realize that there was an afternoon of dance at the place we had stopped at. We watched couples young and old dancing, and it was so mesmerizing. I love that. One of my favorite things is when I'm on holiday, usually on holiday because people in the Netherlands do not do this. I'm on holiday and there's like a random street on the street dance event. And people can dance so well in other countries that are not the Netherlands. Then Orange Sheep shared, it's a uniting experience to see beauty together in the same thing as another person. Me and my friend decided to go out last week and we were enjoying the music in the bar so much and we owned the dance floor. And I remember looking at her and thinking, yeah, she gets it too. Or when I shared the coconut beans with a group of people that I was hanging out with. And the guy that I liked was the only one who liked the taste of them too. And I saw that it was genuine. And it was such a connecting experience. Wow, you can also find beauty in this simple thing. I can do that too. How can they not find that beautiful? Or when I was having lunch alone at my favorite cafe, and there were beautiful chrysanthemums in a vase, and I sent a picture to my mom because she loves the flowers too. And she replied with genuine curiosity. So I knew it was shared too. I love this. I love how you connected seeing beauty to connection with other people, and that when you both see beauty in the same thing, that is such a uniting experience. I love this. Thank you guys so much for sharing your experiences with me. I really love, I love what we have going on here. I love hearing all your guys' like little whimsical stories. Okay, but let's get into the topic this week, and that is the analog trend. So this is a trend that I think with the word analog attached to it started in 2025. It's been around for a while, but in 2026, it kind of blew up because everyone was putting this on their New Year's resolutions of like, in 2026, I want to be more analog. And then this snowballed into a ton of people on the internet making how-to videos of how to become more analog, how to get more analog hobbies, how to consume more analog media in 2026. And with all that content, the hype just became bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, I have noticed that in this analog trend, there's kind of two sides of it. On the one hand, we have the analog hobbies side that is very focused on the hobbies, doing physical hobbies that are not just with the screen, like knitting or coloring books, or doing puzzles or crocheting, reading. I've even seen people recommend like going foraging in the woods. It's very focused on getting craftsy or getting hobbies, like not just having your only hobbies be video games or watching TV or scrolling on TikTok. And then the other side of the analog trend that I've noticed is more focused on owning physical media, owning analog media. So having DVDs, collecting vinyls, or even collecting CDs, cassettes, having a small MP3 player. I would say all those people that are getting a flip phone instead of a regular phone are also kind of part of this trend. Having like an old photo camera instead of using your phone, and then developing those photos, maybe putting them in like a photo book. Both parts are very linked to each other, and they're both a response to living too much on our phones and relying too much on mainstream technology. It is both offered as an alternative to doom scrolling, to being on your phone, and also giving all of our free time to like big technology companies. But I do feel like both these sides of the trend offer like a slightly different solution to a slightly different problem. I would say that the analog hobbies videos, and that to me personally is what I mostly get on my feed, probably because I've been like a hobby girl for a while, so that's what gets recommended for me. This is very focused on like reclaiming our free time, getting hobbies that are not phone related. It's very focused on joy, I would say, and having fun and to stop doom scrolling. And then the owning analog media, at least how I have like seen it, is more about taking back control over what you own. So it's like embracing the slight inconvenience, I guess, of not having the world of films at your fingertips for the sake of not being reliant on Netflix, on Spotify, on Amazon, things like that. Because if you are reliant on, for example, Netflix, if they take down your favorite like comfort TV show, then you no longer have access to it. But if you own a DVD box of your favorite TV show, then it is always yours and you own it. And I've seen that kind of as the focus on that side of the analog hobby. So I just kind of wanted to explore both sides and what they're trying to achieve and whether I think that they are succeeding at that. Okay, let's start with chatting about the analog hobbies trend. I think this is how the analog trend has like mostly turned into the mainstream. Like I've seen news articles about like how young people are picking up grandma hobbies, which I love. I love grandma hobbies. When I think of like my personal experience with the analog trend, I would say it is in this way with the analog hobbies. And I will talk about like my personal examples at the end of the video. First, we're just going to do some deep analysis. I'm just going to give you my opinion on the whole trend. And then at the end, we will just yap and have a little bit of fun and talk about crafts. So the analog hobbies trend is very focused on crafting and all kinds of different hobbies that you could pick up, like getting a coloring book or doing those paint by numbers things or those like diamond paintings, where people like put down diamonds and it turns into like pixel art basically, where people are doing puzzles, people are going for walks, people are knitting, crocheting. There's this whole trend on TikTok of having an analog hobby bag or analog hobby crate where you just have basically it's just a bag where you put your hobbies. Well, I understand why it's a big new thing because it's a fun buzzword and then everyone also wants to have an analog bag. So they buy all kinds of stuff like knitting needles and like coloring books. So they have the feeling, I think, well, maybe I'm being a little mean here, but I feel like this idea of the analog bag is so much about just creating a bag that gives you the feeling of potentially being off your phone. Do you understand what I mean? Like, it's not really about actually going off your phone because, as we all understand, all of these videos exist on your phone and they exist on the internet. And I have consumed so much of this content, and I'm very aware of the fact that I was not actually doing my hobbies as I was watching these videos. And I think the creation of an analog hobby bag that is full of like painting supplies and crafting supplies gives you this idea, this feeling of like, I could potentially be off my phone. I now have created this item in my life that gives me the feeling that I could get off my phone and have a lower screen time, but it's not actually leading to, I mean, maybe it's a small step in the right direction, but it's not actually leading to actually getting off your phone. It's like when you make a big planning for like all your plans, or you make like a huge workout plan or a big plan of how you're going to change your life, and you spend so much time making a beautiful vision board, making a beautiful Notion planner, and then you feel like you already almost did that. You feel like you created that potential energy. You can feel it, but you're not actually executing it. I've definitely done that very, very often. I have many, many abandoned Notion planning pages. And I feel like the analog bag is just another version of that, where it creates this potential towards doing what you want to do, but we're not actually doing it. It's like an easy way to buy stuff and consume stuff and buy a bunch of coloring books and buy a bunch of painting supplies to give you the feeling that you're going to be doing all those hobbies, but then actually doing that is the next step. And that's actually the hardest part. Anyway, what I noticed about this whole like analog hobbies trend, especially the hobby part of it, is that it's genuinely not very new. Like it very much reminded me of the cozy hobby trend that we had a few years ago. I think it came up around the pandemic where I was watching, where my feed at least was full of like cozy hobbies to try. And it was also about pick up crocheting, get like a coloring book, or like do a little jigsaw puzzle. Like the content is exactly the same. It's just that now people are calling it analog hobbies instead of cozy hobbies. And the one big difference is that cozy hobbies often also contained video games, especially cozy video games were really big back then. Like everyone was playing Animal Crossing and Stardew Valley. And now in the analog hobby trend, of course, the video games are taken out of it because that's a screen. and therefore it is, not analog. I also see this as an extension of the commonplace book trend that we had a few years ago. I feel like every year there's at least one YouTube video about someone recommending you should start a commonplace book that completely blows up, because this analog hobby trend is also very focused on keeping notebooks and writing things down by hand instead of on your phone, and like journaling or scrapbooking. And also the commonplace book has kind of gotten a rise again. But this is, again, it's not new. Like, this is something that I've been seeing on my page for years. It's just now that we've attached a new buzzword to it. I do feel like it is more popular now, but I don't really have the numbers on that. Like, it's reached a more mainstream audience outside of just the people that were already crafty and already journaling, but I don't have the numbers on that. I mean, the fact that it's on the news now makes me think like it's definitely gotten bigger than it's ever been. And I kind of started thinking to myself, why is it that it is so big now? And I think it's because the timing is perfect, right? Like, people are genuinely annoyed with social media and have been for a while now. I remember last year there were so many videos on YouTube all about like how the internet sucks nowadays, how social media sucks nowadays. I feel like the past year there has been this growing feeling of discontent with our own phones and with our own screen times. Anti-doom scrolling content and anti-brain rot content has already gained a lot of popularity in the past year. I think people were kind of looking for a solution to this, and this trend of analog media seemed to be like that perfect solution at the right time. I also think it fits into the general cultural trend. We are kind of in a general cultural shift towards like wellness and personal health. In case you haven't noticed, like a few years ago, there was a lot of marketing around like being sustainable and being performatively progressive. Like, that was kind of sold. The easiest example that I can always give is that a few years ago, everyone was drinking oat milk. Maybe this was just in the Netherlands, but this was like a big thing in the Netherlands, this idea of like the oat milk elite, of like people who would always order oat milk with their matcha lattes or their cappuccinos so they could feel like they were being sustainable, they were being good for the planet, even though they would then, eat a bunch of cheese. Because the culture at the time really encouraged a kind of performative sustainability, performative progressivism. And now people are not using oat milk anymore, or it's less trendy. And now people are drinking whole milk in their coffees again, because now the trend is more towards wellness. It's better for you, it's healthier, there's actually protein in it. Everything has protein in it nowadays. Oh my gosh, don't get me started. I think this is one of my biggest pet peeves, is the fact that everything needs to have protein in it. I saw a soup with protein. It was a protein soup. Anyway, I digress. What I'm trying to say is the culture has kind of shifted towards selling us personal wellness and personal health. And I think this analog trend actually kind of fits into that, because the idea of the analog hobbies is very much like, this is going to stop your brain rot. This is going to be good for you. It's going to be good for your mental health. It's going to stop your phone addiction. Your brain is rotting away, and here's the solution. You gotta make an analog bag. I'm not trying to say that any of this is like good or bad, but I do think that this is why the trend has taken off so much right now. Like, the time is just ripe for it. And I think the focus of this analog hobby trend is very much to stop you from going on your phone. And yeah, the question is, does it achieve that? Personally, I think that this analog versus digital thing is a little bit too black and white. Like, it's really presenting it as anything with a screen is bad and anything analog is good. And I think there's a little bit more nuance to that. Like, for example, I recently took up knitting, and I love knitting. I love that it's without a screen. I love that it's very hands-on. I'm actually using my hands. I'm feeling the yarn. I'm feeling the yarn slip over the knitting needles in my fingers. I'm creating something in the real world, that I can actually wear. But I wouldn't have been able to learn how to knit without YouTube videos. Okay? There are wonderful other ways, of course, to learn how to knit that I don't want to like devalue at all, like knitting books that are full of patterns, or maybe from a family member or someone else that you know that can teach you. But I also think it's absolutely wonderful that nowadays it's so easy to learn how to knit because you can just watch a YouTube video where someone demonstrates it for you. You don't even have to read a pattern if you are completely new. So I think that this dichotomy where we think that everything that is digital is bad and everything that is analog is good is a little bit unnuanced. I think one of the reasons that it's so popular is because it gives people this idea of like, ooh, I can just buy this easy solution to being on my phone too much. If I just buy this new coloring book, then that is like a quick, easy fix for my high screen time, which of course it doesn't work like that. Now, for this episode, I kind of started to wonder, like, is there like a genuine difference in your brain, like when you do analog hobbies? So I tried to just look up like a little bit of examples, and then I kind of fell into a rabbit hole. So we are now going to make a digression. We are going to be talking about the influence of writing versus typing, because a lot of these analog hobbies is very focused on like, oh, you're gonna have to write things down in a journal, in a commonplace book, instead of always typing on your laptop or your phone. And I read this article about the difference in what happens in your brain when you're writing versus when you're typing. And it was so interesting that I kind of just want to share the whole thing with you. Because if you think about it, you know, handwriting and typing are two very, very different things. Handwriting usually involves only one hand, typing you do with two hands. Handwriting, you are focusing your attention on like the thing that is right in front of you, whereas when you're typing, you are focusing on the keyboard, but then also focusing on your screen. And you kind of have to go back and forth unless you are a blind typer. Also, random question, can you guys type with 10 fingers? I recently realized that this is not something everyone can do, or is maybe nowadays everyone in Gen Z can type with 10 fingers? Let me know. Anyway, I remember taking like a typing class when I was a child. I can blind type with 10 fingers, so I don't have to look at the keyboard anymore. I can only look at the screen. Anyway, so this article is called The Neuroscience Behind Writing, Handwriting versus Typing, Who Wins the Battle by Marano et al. And it was published in Life magazine. So, of course, handwriting has existed for a way longer time than typing on a digital device did. But even within handwriting, we know that there are differences between certain alphabets or styles of writing. So the authors talk about the writing of Chinese characters and hieroglyphs, which of course are already just a little bit more complex than our standard Latin alphabet. And they say that if you write Chinese characters or hieroglyphs, there's more activation of the visual spatial processing areas in our brain. So that is the areas in our brains that are busy with like visuals, what you can see, and also in space, spatial, like up and down and back and forth. This is in contrast with the alphabetic systems, which predominantly engage the phonological processing area, so the sounds. And they say that the cognitive demands of writing hieroglyphic characters may lead to enhanced visual spatial memories as compared to alphabet-based writing. I mean, you can imagine if you write complex kanji or hieroglyphs, that requires different processing in your brains because you need to use more the part of your brain that is very busy with creating basically this little drawing that doesn't need to be there when you write a simple alphabet that is more focused on just the sounds of the single letters. So that's already an example of how different ways of handwriting have differences in how it's processed in your brain. Now you can imagine that there's also going to be a difference in neural processing between handwriting and typing. So they write that handwriting mostly involves the coordination of linguistic, motor, and visual spatial processing. So of course, you need to understand the language that you're going to be writing. Motor processes means that there's the involvement of all the tiny little muscles in your hand that have to hold the pen and change it just slightly to write like a small letter. And then again, the visual spatial processes, which is that you need to understand like where in space you are. And remember that writing requires like super precise, fine motor skills. Like, do you guys remember learning to write? Have you seen a child hold a pen and trying to like write a word? Like, it's really bad. It's difficult. Like, it's such a fine movement that seems so normal to us now. Like once you've learned how to write, it goes so smoothly, it goes so easily. But that is something that we had to take years to learn in school. Your brain controls your muscles, and the muscle in your hand when you're writing have to make all these very detailed, small little changes to write numbers or words. And they write from an evolutionary perspective. Handwriting evolved from the fine motor control skills needed for tool use and from early forms of symbolic representation, such as cave drawings. I love that. Like the same fine motor skills in your hands that you needed, as a little caveman when we used a little rock to open a coconut or to make drawings in a cave. Obviously, they are different movements, but they are fine motor skills. And it is those same parts of the brain that have evolved to help us with that tool use that we now use to do handwriting. I think that's beautiful. Then we have typing, which is a super recent skill. They say it builds on gross motor skills. So you're just tapping your fingers, it's not very delicate. It's not a fine motor control skill. And they say it reduces the cognitive load of creating unique forms. So, you're not deciding whether you're going to put a little extra swirl in the S or an extra harsh line on the T, or maybe you want to put a little heart on your eyes. No, there's no creativity involved. Every type that you type is the exact same letter on the screen. So as you can imagine, when you're handwriting, you are using different parts of your brain, like the parts of your brain that are used for fine motor control, as opposed to when you're typing, when you're using the parts of your brain that are needed for like finger smashing. And the authors write, these two modes of writing may contribute differently to cognitive processes such as memory retention, learning, and language processing. Now, there is, of course, also overlap. They also mention a few studies that show that there are shared parts of the brain that are active, whether you're typing or whether you're handwriting. But when it comes to memory, they say writing by hand strengthens memory and learning through the encoding effect, where the effort of forming letters improves the retention and comprehension. Like I do remember when I was still at university, the teachers would always say, they would always recommend you would make notes by hand because you just remember it better when you are making notes by hand, because like they say, the effort of forming the letters just makes it easier for you to retain the information. Greater cognitive effort during handwriting might be a key driver of its memory benefits. And then typing does not engage the brain's memory system so deeply. They do mention that typing is still very useful for example, getting a lot of information down very quickly, because of course it is a lot quicker. But they say that most people, when they're typing, they're just transcribing what is heard verbatim. Whereas when you're handwriting, you are using more of your brain because you're thinking of like how to paraphrase it in such a way that you can very quickly write down a whole story that someone just said. And they also mentioned that when you're handwriting, people tend to incorporate more cognitive structures because we're creating mind maps, diagrams, and conceptual frameworks, thereby engaging multiple brain regions at once. It has also been shown in children that children who practice writing by hand had better reading fluency and comprehension skills than those that mostly use typing. So typing might be better when you want to be quick, when you want to brainstorm, but handwriting, because you're just using more parts of your brain because of like the physical element to it, will help you with remembering and also reflecting better on what you've written down, which fits the analog trend where people are encouraging you to write things down so you actually remember things better and are a little bit more reflective. And the actual physical movement of the pen forces you to slow down and therefore process things more. As they say, handwriting appears to promote stronger connections between visual, so what you see, motor, so your movement, and cognitive functions, thereby reinforcing memory and learning. And they even mentioned that writing in cursive activates more regions of the brain than just writing in block letters, because when you're writing in cursive, specifically the activation of the motor cortex and the cerebellum, which are parts of the brain that are involved in movement and activating your muscles and understanding where you are in space. Because when you're cursive writing, you need to be way more aware of how to create smooth transitions between the letters, right? And when you're writing, you have to anticipate, as they say, the next letter in a continuous motion. And that is just cognitively a harder task than writing simple block letters. I just think this is so interesting because I think that handwriting is something that we're almost kind of taking for granted. Like it's something that comes so easy to us now. We can almost forget that it took us years to learn, and also all the brain processes that are involved in it. And there were some other examples that I found where analog media actually engages our brains more than digital media. I found that people have better reading comprehension when they're reading from print versus from a screen. This has led some people to say that you shouldn't be reading from an e-reader, but the research that I found didn't test on e-ink screens. They just tested on digital screens. There's also tons of research that shows that rather obviously outdoor play in children is better than looking at their screen. If children spend too much time looking at their screen, it has an influence on their memory. It has an influence on their emotional regulation, which kind of gets worse. But just a little bit of outdoor playtime mitigates the negative effects of their screen time. I just think it's so important to remember that our brains have evolved to help us through life as like little cavemen, basically. It has evolved to help us carve spare points. It has evolved to help us communicate to each other with words. And so much of our technology makes it so that we don't need to use those parts of our brain anymore. And in some cases, that might be very nice and very convenient, but it's also kind of a waste. It's kind of like when you have a whole set of paint at your disposal and you're only coloring with red. And I can also imagine, although I couldn't find any research on this, that when you're doing hobbies like knitting or painting, you are also activating more sensory parts of your brain and also the motor cortex of your brain more, because you're actually feeling the yarn in your hand, you're feeling the paint move, you're actually making small movements, as opposed to when you're just doing something on your screen, which is mostly focused just on visual and audio processing instead of using all of your senses. Then I do want to talk a little bit about the other side of the analog trend, which is the analog media trend. So this is people that are going back to owning DVDs, getting a Polaroid camera, printing out photo books of photos that they took on like a little disposable camera, people who are getting rid of Spotify, getting rid of Netflix, and going back to physical media. Maybe this is just my algorithm, but I do feel like the analog hobby part of this trend has really mostly taken over. And I think it's because that side lends itself more for like virality and consumerism, whereas the analog media trend, it's also focused on owning stuff, actually, now that I think about it. But this one feels like it has a little bit more of an ideological or political underpinning, because it's very much about the idea of actually owning something, right? If you subscribe to a streaming service, you don't own the film or the music. You are completely at the mercy of these companies. If they decide to take a film or a movie or an audiobook down, you don't have it anymore. You're basically just renting everything, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but it also means that they can change things whenever they want to. Like, for example, last year there was a bit of a scandal around Kindle, because how it used to be with Kindles, if you buy an audiobook, you just own that EPUB. You have that EPUB, you can download that EPUB to your laptop. Like, yes, it's on your Kindle, but you can download it to everything basically and send it around, and you will always own that specific copy that you bought. But Kindle changed it so that that isn't a thing anymore, and you only own that copy on your Kindle and not outside it. You are completely dependent now on having an Amazon device. And also, if they decide to change something in the edition for whatever reason, it will automatically change and you no longer have access to that old version, which, as you can imagine, can have a pretty big impact when it comes to censoring media. I found that the focus of this analog media trend is very much on gaining back control over what you own and not being at the mercy of these tech companies. It's very adjacent to like the discussion around inconvenience and how everything is so convenient nowadays that we're kind of forgetting the repercussions of it, and that we're kind of friction maxing, maybe a word that you've heard. Like, there was someone who wrote an article about how we need to be friction maxing, and not only doing all the convenient things. The question is, of course, does this trend actually achieve this gaining back of control? I do think to a certain extent, but just like with the analog hobbies, there is, of course, the great opportunity for consumerism here. And I'm gonna be honest, like, the first thing that I thought when I was looking into this trend was like, maybe I want to get a record player and buy some records and actually have some vinyls that I can play instead of being reliant on Spotify. Whereas, of course, I could also just, like get Tidal or Deezer, which are generally better companies than Spotify, and actually pay their musicians better. But the allure of owning vinyls was pulling at me, Also, just like with the analog hobbies, this is not new. Like, that was the first thing that I was thinking about. I was like, excuse me, when I was 16, there were hip girlies in my class that collected vinyls. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that among Gen Z, the hip alternative people were collecting CDs. Also, I realized I don't actually think that the best solution to companies having all the archiving power is to individually own things. Creating a satisfying collection of DVDs and music, and then also getting your hands on all the equipment that can play that media is going to cost a lot more, I think, than just having a few subscriptions to streaming services. This makes it so that people who can afford to own will have control, whereas people who can't afford to own things themselves will still be at the mercy of these streaming services. And moreover, it doesn't actually fix the underlying problem. I think that the better solution is investing in public libraries, public archiving spaces, where anyone can just rent a book or a DVD, or even there's probably an archive of like older versions of media. Also, when you think about it, before streaming services were a thing, I didn't own like dozens and dozens of DVDs and CDs. I went to the library to pick out a new movie to watch at home. Like, that's how people did that. And I do think that it's interesting that now this analog physical media trend is popping up. People are creating this idea that the solution to streaming services, the only other option, is owning everything yourself. And we're kind of forgetting that we used to go to the library for this. Owning quote unquote older technology has always been kind of a trend among alternative people as like a way to resist the mainstream, basically. But now we've just added this buzzword of analog onto it, and now it seems like it's a new trend. And that's what I think this is, to be honest. I do think this is just going to be a trend, especially if I see how much it has blown up on TikTok when we get these trends like creating an analog bag or creating an analog basket. That to me is a clear trend indicator, something that people are trying to quickly capitalize on before it goes away. And of course, I hope that it doesn't remain a trend. Like, I really do hope that it sticks around. And I don't think it's gonna go away because, like I said, there have always been and will always be crafty people that like to have hobbies, and there have always been and will always be people that like to collect older technology and not go with whatever technology is mainstream at the moment. But I do really hope that kind of like the core message of trying to break away from your phone and trying to be more in the physical world will remain. And I think we can do that if we keep talking about it and not stop talking about it the moment the trend dies down. As consumers of this type of analog content, I think it is important that we try to stick with our new hobby and not immediately try everything and crash and burn, but really just like focus on one thing and try to get really into it. And now, for the last part of this video, I just want to talk about my own favorite analog hobbies, because I think like when we're talking about this analog trend, I am not someone for analog media. I am actually extremely reliant on subscription services. That might be something I need to start looking into and think about. The only like physical media that I own are books, and I do really enjoy collecting books, which I will admit definitely has a little bit of materialism added to it. But I get my music, my films, my audiobooks all from streaming services. But when it comes to hobby, I have many. I have many analog hobbies. Obviously, I like reading. If you watch my main channel, you already know that. I've recently been getting into knitting. And like I said, I love it because it's so tactile. Like you're actually touching something and forming something with your hands. That is also why I actually still really want to get into pottery. I took like a pottery class last year and I loved how it just gets your hands dirty, and it's cold at first. And then also, pottery is like, it requires more force than I expected. Like, you really need to apply a lot of force on the thing that you are throwing. I also love that we call it throwing. I'm just throwing a ball right now. Anyway, um, I love the physicality of analog hobbies. I am someone who tends to be very in my head all the time, and I find it very hard to be in the moment. And I've noticed that picking up hobbies that are very in the moment and not just on the screen really helps me ground myself and be more physical with the reality around me. And like I said, I've been loving also actually the internet, the digital part of the knitting, like going on Pinterest and Instagram and seeing all these beautiful things that other people have made and like saving things that inspire me that I might want to make into the future. And yes, I do see that this is kind of a pitfall where I can spend way too much time just looking at things that I want to knit, looking at things that other people have knit instead of actually knitting myself. So it's something that I need to watch, but I do actually like that this digital aspect makes it so easy and accessible for people to get into knitting and for people to inspire each other. But there is, of course, also, I think, great beauty in learning from old patterns or old patterning books. And if you're listening to this and you think, okay, all these analog hobbies sound like they require a lot of creativity, and I'm not a creative person, I'm not an artsy person, don't worry, there is stuff for you. Something that I loved a few years ago was puzzles, like doing little cryptograms and sudokus. Ooh, I could spend so much time on that. I also have a bunch of tiny little jigsaw puzzles, like really small ones that are the size of like an A5 notebook that you can make within half an hour. Because although I love jigsaw puzzles, they take up kind of a lot of space on your table. So it can be a little bit of an inconvenience, especially if you live smaller. I recommend looking for like the small jigsaw puzzles, and you can easily just do them over and over again. This is my weird little tip. If you are someone that tends to go on their phone when they're on the toilet, I know you do it. I know you do it. Okay, just admit it. I recommend like ripping a page from a puzzle book and hanging it in your toilet with a little pen so that when you go to the toilet, you can do, a few words on your crossword puzzle. And this is especially so fun if I have guests over, because every time I have guests over, they go to the toilet and then they come back to the toilet and they're like, "Oh, I just added Argentina. I keep thinking about this one and I can't think of it. Or I saw that you had this word, but I actually think it's this other one." Love it. It's a great conversation starter. That's, I think, my little whimsical tip of the week. And then the final ones is that I have a ton of journals. I have a journal for like, journaling your thoughts. I really prefer doing that with pen and paper because of everything that we just talked about. It does feel more reflective. I feel like I can actually go through my thoughts a little bit more precisely because I have to write a little bit more slowly. And I also have a scrap journal that I love where I make collages, I make vision boards, I just jot down random thoughts, I put in scraps that I find. Sometimes I will draw in it, I will sketch in it. I basically just use it for everything creative related, and you can get as creative with it as you want. Like you can draw in it, paint in it, but if you're not an artsy person like that, you can also just make little collages with washi tapes and stickers and things like that. I love doing that. It's also an awesome activity to do with friends, like scrap journaling together and then just chatting with a nice cup of tea or a glass of wine. So yeah, my tips if you want to get into analog hobbies is that you just have to have fun. You don't need to get a whole analog bag. You don't need to have like 10 different creative analog hobbies. Like that's the thing with how this trend has kind of morphed on social media. It's turned into kind of more is better. If you have one analog hobby that you want to spend all of your time on, that's good too. Like the only goal here is to get off your phone. You don't need to have 10 different hobbies. I mean, you could because it's fun and it's fun to try things out, but you don't have to like buy all the supplies right now. And I think when it comes to physical media, you can always go to the library to get a DVD or to get an audiobook, or you can lend something from a friend. You don't need to immediately create your own collection, I think. Although I do love collecting. I do understand the joy of collecting, but you don't need to collect everything that you saw on Instagram once. This sounds like I'm like lecturing you and accusing you of something. You're probably not doing that. I don't think that you are doing that, but there are people that are doing that. And I think it's a pitfall that we need to all kind of be wary of. In the meantime, I will be continuing my knitting journey. Just a little update on the scarf. If you've been listening to the last, just getting it from the random pile of stuff that is neatly hidden behind my couch. If you watch like my YouTube videos, you know that this couch is always on screen. I'm so often seated here, and now you know. Trust me, every time you watch, there is a pile of clutter and trash right behind this couch. Anyway, I'm still in the process of embroidering stars on it, green little stars on a skinny cream colored scarf, right? I just need a few more stars on each side. And then we're there. And I've made my own thing. I love that. I can wear it and people can ask me, where did you get that? And I can say, ooh, I made it myself. Now, I'm going to be honest. This is very clearly my first knitting project. So I think it's more the kind of scarf that's going to get people asking, oh, did you make that yourself? You know, like in a kind of not very complimentary way. Anyway, that was it for this week. If you have any stories related to analog media or analog hobbies or this whole trend, leave them down in the comments and maybe you will get a feature in a future podcast episode. That being said, I really hope you enjoyed listening. Love you all, and I will see you again next week. Goodbye.